The world just got a lot smaller and a whole lot more dangerous. While the eyes of the American public have been glued to conflicts in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, a bombshell report has emerged from a location much closer to home. Just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, in the sun-drenched landscape of Cuba, something chilling has been spotted: Iranian-made attack drones. This isn't just a rumor or a whisper in the halls of intelligence. It's a grave warning that has sent shockwaves through the Pentagon. Intelligence leaks suggest that the same suicide drones that have devastated infrastructure in Ukraine, the Shahd 136, are now sitting on Caribbean soil. This isn't just about a few pieces of hardware. It's about a strategic pivot by Tehran to place a dagger at the throat of the United States. Tonight, we break down the detailed intelligence, the secret flights from Tehran to Havana, and the terrifying reality of what this means for national security. Is this the start of a second Cuban Missile Crisis, or is it something even more difficult to stop? To understand how we got here, we have to look at the alliance of the Sanctioned. For years, Iran and Cuba have shared a common enemy: Washington. Both nations have been throttled by economic sanctions, and both have sought ways to bypass the Western financial system. But lately, this relationship has evolved from diplomatic pleasantries to a full-blown military partnership. Recent flight tracking data reveals a surge in mysterious cargo flights. Heavy transport planes, linked to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRG, have been making non-stop journeys from Tehran to Havana. What were they carrying? On paper, it was medical supplies and technical equipment. But the bombshell report suggests the cargo was much more lethal. The report indicates that Iran isn't just selling drones to Cuba. They are setting up assembly lines. This is the same blueprint Iran used in Russia. They send the kits, they send the technicians, and they teach a local workforce how to build these silent killers. By outsourcing production to Cuba, Iran gains a Western front without ever having to fire a shot from their own territory. What exactly are we looking at? The primary concern is the Shahd 136. It's often called a suicide drone or a loitering munition. It doesn't look like a traditional Predator drone. It's a delta-wing aircraft, relatively small and incredibly cheap to produce. It's essentially a flying cruise missile for the budget-conscious. It doesn't require a massive runway. It can be launched from the back of a truck or a shipping container. Once in the air, it uses GPS and inertial navigation to fly hundreds of miles. It flies low, hugging the terrain to avoid radar detection. And here is the kicker. It's made of carbon fiber and plastic, making it nearly invisible to traditional air defense systems designed to track giant metal jets. When it hits its target, it doesn't just drop a bomb, it is the bomb. Carrying a 40-kilogram warhead, it can take out power grids, command centers, or naval vessels. In Ukraine, these drones have been used in swarms. Imagine 20 or 30 of these coming at a target at once. You might shoot down 10, but the remaining 20 will get through. Now, imagine that swarm launching from a base just minutes away from Miami. 90 miles, that is the distance between Havana and Key West. To a drone flying at 120 miles per hour, that's a short commute. The strategic implications of this are staggering. For 70 years, the United States has enjoyed the protection of two massive oceans. But the drone age has erased that barrier. If these drones are stationed in Cuba, they can reach the most sensitive military installations in the southeastern United States. We are talking about Central Command in Tampa, the massive naval bases in Jacksonville, and the space centers at Cape Canaveral. Even more concerning is the threat to the Gulf of Mexico energy corridor. A single swarm of Iranian drones could cripple the offshore oil rigs that power the American economy. The Pentagon's Southern Command, or SOUTHCOM, has issued a grave warning because our current domestic air defenses are not optimized for this. We are great at spotting ICBMs coming over the North Pole or fighter jets over the Pacific. We are not as prepared for a slow-moving, plastic drone flying at treetop level over the Florida Straits. This is a blind spot that Tehran is exploiting with surgical precision. The headlines are already calling it the new Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1962, the world held its breath as Soviet nuclear missiles were discovered in Cuba. Back then, it was a game of chicken between two superpowers. This, however, is different. It's asymmetric warfare. In the 60s, you could see a giant missile on a launch pad from a U-2 spy plane. Today, you can hide a dozen drones in a standard fruit warehouse. Drones are the poor man's air force. They allow a small nation like Cuba, backed by a rogue state like Iran, to exert massive pressure on a global superpower without ever needing a nuclear weapon. The grave warning from intelligence officials emphasizes that this isn't about an immediate invasion. It's about blackmail. If the U.S. moves to strike Iranian nuclear sites in the Middle East, Iran can now signal its ability to strike back directly at the American homeland through its proxies in Cuba. It creates a balance of terror that hasn't existed in the Western Hemisphere for decades. But why would Cuba take such a massive risk? Why invite the wrath of the U.S. by hosting Iranian weapons? The answer, as always, is money and survival. The Cuban economy is in its worst state since the fall of the Soviet Union. Food shortages, power blackouts, and crumbling infrastructure have pushed the regime to the brink. Iran is offering a lifeline. In exchange for hosting drone facilities, Iran provides oil, credit, and agricultural technology. Furthermore, it gives the Cuban military a massive upgrade. By integrating Iranian drone tech into their own defense, the Cuban Revolutionary Armed Forces become a much more formidable deterrent. It's a marriage of convenience. Cuba needs a protector, Iran needs a launch pad. Together, they are creating a geopolitical headache that Washington cannot ignore. For the Cuban leadership, the drones are a life insurance policy against any future attempts at regime change. The reaction in Washington has been a mix of fury and frantic planning. Congressional hearings have already begun, with lawmakers demanding to know how this was allowed to happen. Some are calling for a total blockade of the island, echoing the actions of JFK. Others warn that a blockade could trigger a broader war with Iran. The White House is in a difficult position. If they react too harshly, they risk pushing Cuba even further into the arms of Russia and China. If they react too softly, they show weakness and invite Iran to bring even more advanced weaponry, like short-range ballistic missiles, to the island. Meanwhile, America's allies are watching closely. If the U.S. can't secure its own backyard, what does that mean for its commitments in Europe or the Pacific? The Iranian drone report isn't just about a local threat, it's a test of American hegemony. The grave warning, issued this week, is as much for the American public as it is for our adversaries. It's an admission that the era of Fortress America is over. How do you stop a threat that you can barely see? The Pentagon is scrambling to deploy counter-UAS, unmanned aircraft systems, technology to the southern border. This includes electronic warfare jammers that can fry the drone's GPS link and high-energy lasers that can burn a wing off in seconds. But these systems are expensive and still in the early stages of mass deployment. We are also seeing a shift in naval posture. The U.S. Coast Guard and Navy are increasing patrols in the Florida Straits, looking for the motherships that might be used to launch these drones closer to our shores. The most effective defense, however, might be diplomatic. Washington is reportedly reaching out to neutral Latin American countries to pressure Cuba into backing down. But with Iran's influence growing across the global south, that diplomacy is facing an uphill battle. The report of Iranian drones in Cuba is a wake-up call. It tells us that the conflicts of the Middle East are no longer thousands of miles away. They are at our doorstep. As the intelligence community continues to monitor the hangars in Havana, one thing is clear. The rules of engagement have changed. We are entering a new chapter of global tension, where a 90-mile gap feels like no distance at all. Stay tuned as we continue to track this developing bombshell. The warning has been issued. Are we listening?